Hello, everybody, and welcome to Adobe Live. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we are creating and streaming from today and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Flynn, and I'm here with my good friend and fantastic illustrator, Jeremy Lord. Hello, Jeremy. How are you?
Hey man, how's it going?
I'm good. I'm good. We had a great time in the stream yesterday. We were learning kind of the
Good.
intro stuff to pixel art and stuff like that. I'm a bit hot today, so I might look a bit sweaty on cam. It's like
It's warm today, isn't
37
it?
degrees, I
Yeah,
think.
and it's like 10,000% humidity.
Yeah, so we're in the tropics at the moment, so make sure you drink water if
Hmm.
you're in our hood. But yeah, I'm good other than the heat. What about you? How are you going?
I would say that's a fair assessment of how I'm going as well. Yeah, good, but a little bit hot, a little bit humid.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
that's it. Well, okay, cool. Hey, we are definitely live today. We had a couple of pretty good questions before. Hello, Dark Hours. Hello, Alessandra. Love your plants, even if it's fake. That one's real, actually. That one, Johanna helps remind me to water, and that's why that looks actually green. This little fella is fake. But yeah, it's a work in progress. I'm in a new space where we're still figuring out what this background is actually going to look like. Um, but back to the stream, Jeremy, do you want to kick off maybe with a bit of a recap of what we did yesterday? But if you did miss yesterday, don't worry. We'll do a quick little recap. You'll be up to speed, and then you can check this out.
yeah. So yesterday we kind of delved into this guy. I've been working on this since yesterday, as always, but we ended up with kind of like this yesterday, right? So we spoke a little bit about starting out with like the kind of like a sketch of like a bento box. Something like food is always a good thing to do with kind of pixel art, as we discussed. Like organics a bit easier to do in pixel art. Food you can give kind of like stats, you can type back into kind of like video game, and it's just just something kind of fun to do. I just got back from Japan, and so I felt like doing a little bento box on the stream because why not?
Why not?
So we spoke a little bit yesterday about kind of setting up your file, all the kind of tweaks that you need to do to various tools, like switching your paintbrush to your pencil brush, making sure all your non-square selection tools are on anti-aliasing ticked off, a whole bunch of different things like that you can catch on the replay of that stream if you want to. But yeah, we looked at like the basics of pixel art and getting started with very basic kind of outlines and how that can look and working with that. Then now we're kind of getting into some more basics. So I've done some relatively basic kind of tweaks here with my artwork. I've just done some fills, made it kind of a little bit more kind of filled out. And now we've got something that we can work with. So today I'm going to start adding in some special effects, and we can talk a little bit about kind of volumes, how you do the shading and the outlines, excuse me, and all that kind of stuff. And actually, before we get into that, I forgot something to mention as well from yesterday. Is we looked a lot at this. We spoke a lot about this and kind of setting up your file. So watch that stream if you haven't already, because this is kind of crucial to like deciding before you start doing any illustrating, deciding what sort of pixel dimension you're going to go for in your image, how detailed, how pixelated you're going to go with, and so on and so forth. So I usually like to work with something like this so you can kind of see the pixels, but it still affords me a little bit of detail. It's not like too harsh in terms of like, here, you have to draw this face and you have 4 pixels to do it. Good luck.
Yeah.
That's a little bit tricky. But on the flip side, if you do something with too many pixels, then it just becomes a little bit kind of a bit of a moot point. It's no longer really pixel art. So finding a good balance is always really important. But so here we are. We've got our little bento. We've got every single kind of food element in that bento going. I've done my chopsticks. They're pretty much like full detail that I would kind of do. We've got some highlights and some shading. As you can see, I've added in some outlines around this. Now, we spoke a little bit about outlines yesterday, and whether you use black outlines or not black outlines, where you can kind of do everything in a more kind of painterly style, like what you're seeing on screen now, or whether you can go a little bit more graphic and kind of seal it all in a nice kind of solid inking, kind of like black outline.
Yeah.
You can do one, you can do the other, you can do a little bit of a mix of both. I'm probably going to do a mix of both on this, in that something that I like to do with this is leave the inside to be not outlined, but the outside has an outline. So if that makes sense, what I'm talking about here is like this little kind of tempura prawn doesn't have an outline inside the drawing. So all the stuff inside the drawing doesn't need to have an outline because that can start to be a little bit too kind of detailed.
Yeah.
Like you get some good contrast when you zoom out, but I do like to kind of work with a little bit of kind of pixelation there and a little bit kind of that painterly look. But then not having any outline still works and it still kind of has that pixel art look, but I do always kind of tend to lean towards something a little bit more graphic. So we can kind of mix it up. We're going to do it with this one and just have the outline of the work be sealed with that kind of black outline, but nothing inside.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so we've got everything here. Now we're ready to kind of add some volume, add some kind of clarity, get some detail going in here, make this food look appetizing and good so that when you're playing your video game, we want to make this, you want to make it, you want to eat it, make it kind of pop a little bit because it is a little bit flat. If we zoom out of this, which you're supposed to do with obviously pixel art, it's meant to be viewed from a distance. It makes a lot more sense. You can see a lot more of the detail from a distance. So from a distance, we're not really getting as much kind of detail as we'd like. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work on this kind of like little rice section here and give that some volume, make it feel like it's not just like some white stuff. What is it? We don't know.
Yeah.
And make it look kind of good there. So
it is just currently, so just quick question. It is just currently white at the moment. It's not just my screen or my eyes.
It's not. So, and it's one of the things that we kind of spoke about a little bit yesterday is this color is actually just short of white. So you never really want to work with, unless you're doing outlines, unless you're going with like a graphic outline, you really never want to work with pure white or pure black when you're doing this kind of stuff. I feel like, especially if it's organic and it's food, you want to work with kind of just shy of, and from a, in the scheme of my artwork, because I've got a sort of a value scale there, that rice looks white enough, right? You can see that that's what it is. But it's also so that I can give it a little bit more of like, if I want to, I can still give it a highlight. So for instance, if I came in here with an actual white, I can, and you can see like that's pure white. There's quite a difference now in between those two.
Yeah, you've got somewhere to go now that you've.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I can give this a little bit of a highlight. What I've also done here is I've added in a little bit of blue into this. So it's not just like gray, it's just got a little bit of a tint to it. Depending on what you're doing, obviously, if it's a different color rice or if it's like, like a hot, sunny summer's day or whatever, you could go with a nice, like warmer light or whatever you kind of want. But you kind of want to try and play with those ideas when you're working with color, because that's one of the color basics. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start by eyedropping this color, and I'm going to add some shading in this. So one of the things that can be tempting to do when you're doing your shading is to just smack a new layer on top and work with black and just do some like shading in here, right?
Right.
And then just drop the opacity down like this. So in some cases, it can work. But what you end up getting is something that's a little bit kind of dull and muddy. And adding black is really never the thing that you want to do when you're adding shading. You always want to go with something a little bit more kind of tonal. So if I do the same thing here, but change this color to like a blue, something like this, and then drop the opacity down, you'll see I'm getting something a lot more kind of like vivid. It's not just kind of muddy and dulled because I've added black. This now feels a little bit more kind of real and alive.
Yeah.
So I could do that. I could just make it on a separate layer, but pixel art's pretty easy to handle and manage and make selections of later on. So I'm not going to be too worried about this. I'm just going to add it in straight onto that layer and we'll be good to go. What I am going to do though, in order to do that, so that I don't have to be too careful of doing this, is I'm going to lock the transparency on this kind of foods layer where I put all my food. So I can either click this little kind of checkerboard in my layer panel or just simply press the / and you'll see this little lock icon come up. what that does is it locks the transparency of my layer. So if I don't do that, you can see if I paint over here, that's what happens. If I do lock it and I paint over here, I'm only getting work happening on the actual pixels that already exist.
Nice.
So it's a good way to kind of get that shading. And then I'm just going to go a little bit nuts at first. Try and get a sense of like if you want, for instance, we can have like it's a bold price, right? So essentially most of the shading will be on this side.
Right.
We want to give it that kind of sense of volume, and overarchingly the shading is going to be over here, but we're going to add some grains throughout, kind of like this as well.
Yeah, because there's like a million of those things, right? Like there are a million things with a little bit of shade, but you don't have that much real estate to play with in pixel art.
Yeah, it is. And like when you're doing trees or anything like that too, you want to consider that kind of idea as well. When you're doing stuff that's made up of lots of things and you're kind of tempted to put shading on the whole thing and like just do something like that, it can just kind of lose itself. You'd end up with this kind of weird camouflage mess of just like there's no more volume here.
Yeah.
So I want to retain that and keep the, like 80% of this blue needs to be in the bottom right hand corner. And then I can just have like bits of it just kind of show grains of rice happening throughout. And I'm not too like, really, I'm just kind of doing whatever feels right at this stage, trying to think about like how grains of rice might look and what kind of shadows they might cast. But really, it's not a huge deal for me now. And then I can add in a little bit of a highlight in here. I think the white was probably a little bit too much. I don't need it to be that vivid, but just a little bit of a highlight over here. And then obviously the opposite's going to happen over here, right? Where it's like the bulk of the highlight's going to be on the opposite end of wherever that shading was.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. And then again, we can zoom out to see like, how does that look? Is that looking kind of how I want it to look? If it's maybe a bit too blue, I can go in with my selection tool here, select that. I'm going to go Command H to hide the selection, because I like to work, when I'm working with color, I don't like to have this little like marching ants selection thing in the way, because it kind of like messes with the other colors in the piece. So I'm going to do Command H and then Command U to bring up this panel. And then I can mess around with the tone of this and see like, do I want my rice to be a little bit more like a warm kind of like color, like it's like almost like brown rice, or am I happy with this blue tone that I had, but maybe it's a little bit too blue, so I want to desaturate that. Like I'll play around with colors quite a bit when I'm doing something like this. And I think I quite like this tone. Potentially, I can kind of swap back. Yeah, that feels a little bit more realistic. This feels like it's like almost like snow. It's a bit too blue. That's not bad. That's working a little bit better for me. There we go. And deselect. So yeah, so that's basically kind of how I would do the rice. Then I could come in with like a little bit of extra detail. So you'll notice this bento, traditionally bento is like black and red. But because my outline is black already, I didn't want the bento to be that as well. So I've got this really dark kind of reddish brown there, just so that I can have a little bit of distinction in between one and the other. And if I need to, I can go darker still in some areas, which I will do in a sec. But I'm going to eyedrop this color and do like a few just little like sesame seeds, like black sesame seeds on this rice, just to give it a little bit of extra kind of like flavor and detail. Just adds a little bit more kind of pep to it, I think. Or maybe it doesn't. I don't know. I kind of drawn a face.
Does it add pep?
I don't know.
You got to try it.
No, I am not super convinced about it right now. Maybe I haven't done it very well. Yeah, we'll leave it in for now. See how we like it as the piece kind of progresses a little bit more. Now, the reason I have taken the same color as this bento is like part laziness, But also, one of the things that is inherent to pixel art is it's one of those things that's like the style didn't just come out of nowhere. It was born out of a necessity and computing power of old machines that didn't have a whole lot of computing power, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we refer to like 8-bit or 16-bit art. Is those machines didn't have a lot of power, and the more colors you have in your artwork, the heavier it is on your computing system to process those images. So you need to find ways to kind of lower that. So using that same color as I did here just means one less color in the mix for this thing, right? And one of the ways that you can kind of see this happening a lot is anybody who's ever played those old kind of arcade games has probably seen a gradient in a sky that looks a little bit like this. And this is what's called dithering, right? It kind of looks like a bad Christmas sweatshirt a little bit.
It does. Looks a bit like that.
Yeah, there's different ways of doing this, by the way. This is just like one of the more standard ways of doing this kind of dithering pattern gradient. There's different ways you can do it. But what that is, it's a pixel art effect. Now we see it as like a style, right? Where we look at this and it's like, that's a pixel art style. But this was born out of a necessity of like, if I want a gradient from this blue to this blue, and I do a smooth gradient, my pixel art can process a gradient like that for sure, right? If I turn on my pixel grid, you'll see it. Like I have a smooth gradient there, but it's using 36 colors to do it because every single one of those pixels that you go in here is just slightly lighter as it progresses up the pixel chain.
Yeah.
Right. So there's 36. That's a lot of information for a computer to process. This one does kind of the same result if looked at from a distance, but only has 2 colors. So again, the key here is that you got to look at it from a distance, right? So from a distance, they're both gradients. Your eye does a lot of the work for you, but only using 2 colors, so far less processing power to be used up from this. So that's one of the reasons why I would do something like this, is just kind of work with that. But we can also apply this to some of the highlights on this kind of like bento box as well, right? So I'm going to go in here, I drop my base tone, and I'm going to bring in a highlight. And I'm going to start dropping in highlights onto this bento box here, right? So we've decided the light's coming from the upper left-hand side. So we're going to stick to that, obviously, on the box as well, and work to that. And immediately you can see that there's a little bit of volume that's starting to happen. It's just got a little bit more clarity into it, a little bit more interest and definition. It's always something that's like very nice to see when you've been working on something for a little while and you kind of bring in some highlights and stuff, and you can start to see how that's affecting your artwork and how it's like giving it a little bit more definition. Super nice to kind of get that result. But what I can do here, instead of kind of bringing in a gradient to kind of show this edge of a corner, is I can do this kind of dithering thing, right? So I need to turn my pixels back on, turn my pixel grid back on so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'll start by doing kind of like a 1-2 kind of pattern, right? 1 off, 1 on. And that's going to kind of give me a sense of a little bit of a softer edge. My eye's going to kind of, again, do that work for me. And I can bring it out and again, right? So I can skip a row, and now I can do, I can do gaps of 2 pixels in between my kind of dithering scale. And then I can keep going on and on with this depending on how much of a smooth gradient I want. Let me hide this pixel grid a little bit so you can see it. You can see already, like, that's looking nice and pixel arty, and it's just giving it that soft edge that I'm kind of after. So actually, I kind of want this box to be a little bit shiny. So I'm actually not going to do that on the light side. I'm only going to do that on the dark side of it. So here I'm actually just going to keep a straight line going down because I wanted to get that kind of like shiny, clean effect. And then on the other side, I'm going to do the dithering thing, right? So now I can go to like almost black, not quite black, almost there, and get that effect happening in here.
Right.
So again, I can maybe kind of guess where I'm going. I don't necessarily have to turn on the pixels again. Go, and now I can do a bit of a checkerboard on that side. And then I can do the skip and 2.
That reminds me of like Game Boy, like Pokemon for sure.
That's the idea, right? So now it's faint, but you can kind of see it here. Like I might just actually darken this a little bit, and maybe I just need, whoops, I need to, hey, deal with it and make it actual black. And then it's kind of a little bit more pronounced. Yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
So I need it to actually be, it's almost black. It's not quite there, but pretty close.
Yeah.
So now I can kind of start to work back into here and bring in some of the highlights that would occur on the edges of these kind of like box compartments as well.
Yeah. Hey, we got a question from chat.
Yeah.
What's something about doing pixel art that surprised you? So I guess maybe when you first got into it or something.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think actually, like for me, how I normally work is a little bit more kind of like traditional digital work, where it's like high res files, clean brushes, smooth brushes, all that kind of stuff. And so working with the selection tool with this was pretty easy, and like working with fills, because I'm working straight onto the pixel kind of grid. I don't have to worry. I can literally go in on single pixels and select them and change them. So I think probably one of the things that surprised me the most was how few layers I needed to make when working in pixel art compared to when I'm working on a digital file as I would. It is simply because the selections are there to be made. It's almost like, it's kind of like the missing link in between vector artwork and bitmap and like Photoshop artwork, because these are all like very easily selectable shapes, right? Like if I do this on this layer, like it's going in and selecting that exact shape, and it's very easy. There's no like curves in this. It's all straight up, straight down, because we're working straight onto the pixel. So that's probably one of the things that I was like surprised and like pleasantly surprised about, is this like ease of use of file handling when I'm working with pixel art as compared to like my regular digital art flow outside of Illustrator. That was super fun to kind of work with and notice for me. Potentially the other thing I would say is the infinite scalability of this, and we'll talk about scalability in a sec, when like towards the end of the stream, because we'll get into like obviously this is not a big file, so we need to work with this and kind of fix it up a little bit for export. But yeah, the scalability of it, and this is what I'm talking about with vector, is like, because there's no aliasing, because it's all just perfect squares, like I could actually increase the file size of this infinitely, just like I would if it was vector art, and I lose 0 resolution.
Right.
Because there's no curves.
Yeah.
And it's one of the funny things, obviously, with a traditional file in any digital program, where it's trying to make circles from squares. It's only giving you the illusion of a circle, right? It's only trying to like trick your eye into making like as many squares as it possibly can to give you the illusion of a smooth curve that's actually made up of not curves. So I think that's one of the cool things with this, is because you're working straight into the program's like core mechanics, you can actually have a few workarounds that you don't have if you're working outside of kind of like pixel art style, if that makes sense. It's a very long-winded answer to your question, but yeah.
No, I like it. It was a great question too. Thanks, Alessandra.
Yeah. So keep going in here and kind of adding in some details into this, getting some kind of highlights happening in our little kind of tempera thing here. We could put highlights on a separate layer as well. That could be a thing that I might kind of consider doing. I don't generally like to do that when I'm working in that kind of painterly style. I'll tend to just work, like try and just get those colors to work a little bit better for me just naturally and get some highlights in there. And that I feel just kind of works much better than doing white and dropping transparency, I think.
Yeah. And that I've been meaning to ask that the Japanese writing to the left, is that actual kanji? If I'm using the right word, you probably know, or is it just a couple of pixels, or is it based on something?
It's hiragana, and it says it's supposed to say it's like type in this kind of format, which also is like a good question in terms of like how does your file size impact you being able to work later on? And this is one of those things, like how does the pixel size and the scale versus the artwork of the pixel allow me to do something like this? And so this says otemoto, which is like what you see on those like takeaway chopsticks, which is another word for chopsticks in Japanese. But yeah, like if I was thinking, for instance, of like, if I go back on, like let me turn my pixel grid back on, and say I wanted to start putting in some type in here, right? So for instance, I could do an O like this, right? Like that could be an O, sure. But then if I wanted to do a B that's 3 pixels tall, I'm kind of stuck because I don't have that like affordability. So if I wanted to do something like a B, I actually need my artwork to be at least 5 pixels tall. And then I can have that kind of thing. Same thing with an E, right? Where it's like, I need a middle. I need an even. If it's 6, if it's 4, it won't work. If it's 4, I can do this, but then where does the middle bar of the E go? It can't go anywhere. It either goes here or it goes here. And then that doesn't work, right? So these are the kind of things that you kind of need to think about when you're doing this. And like, obviously I've kind of varied the height of these a little bit, but yeah, it's an interesting question because it does kind of start pointing at like, all right, so I need to make these letters and I need to kind of fit them in a specific way and make pixel art lettering. It needs to be at least 5 pixels tall so that you can have end and middle, which you at least need in type, right?
Yeah.
It's like you picture those like digital clocks, right? Like those like digital clocks that have like the sections that look like kind of like this. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Like when you're at like when you're watching like track and field or whatever, any kind of like airport thing, you get those things that are like yellow.
Yeah. I know what you're talking
about.
So
they do an 8 because 8 is the one that's like the most complicated to get, and sometimes they have the diagonal through it. So you need to be at least able to make a B or an 8, and then that will tell you the height of your kind of pixel.
And then you're good from there, right?
Yeah, as long as you can do that, you should be able to do other letters pretty easily as well.
Nice.
So yeah, so that's just kind of me trying to work with that on that end and trying to figure out how that could kind of potentially track there. That's a bit too bright. So again, like this is just me now like working in there and trying to get some highlights on this, adding in a good amount of detail into it. We're probably going to need a darker version of this to bring in some highlights. So again here, like not just going to add black, I'm going to drag it down into the red and then add some kind of darkness in here to kind of showcase that piece, hiding, like having a shadow cast from the first piece onto it.
Right.
And I need to do the same thing down here, so I need to darken that. So this is like, again, it's a little bit more time consuming than if I was just to put, because normally what I do in my process is I would do like an adjustment layer on top, and that applies to everything. So I specifically don't have to select a different color for this darker color in the shading. It does it all for me. But I also do enjoy working in this way when I'm working in kind of pixel art, and trying to get that more kind of like painterly feel. So yeah, it's not always about efficiency. Sometimes it's just that's how I kind of want to work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I imagine each piece is a little bit different, like anything. Like you can kind of have a bit of a road map, but you don't have to stick to it like 100%. It's kind of nice to have little variations and go back and forth and change your mind and, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. So now I'm going to put some shading onto these guys, get some volume happening in there. And then same again, right? I could just be lazy and do a color across these two and just kind of figure it out there, but I'm gonna do it the painterly way and do it that way, and it just like it kind of feels nice after a while of like doing things the more efficient way, the more kind of quick way. It's kind of nice to do it a more painterly way, take your time to like pick the right colors and get that effect looking correct. Yeah, it's a little bit of just like me geeking out a little bit and doing something that I like doing. Put some highlights on my little sushi rolls.
There was a question. Are you using a reference? How do you know where to put the shadows when shading? It's another great question from Alessandra.
Yeah, so I will sometimes use reference. So let me sort back. Oops, sorry, Inception. So I've got a bunch of like references of this and looking at like what does it look like. See, like that's why I've put these sesame seeds on the rice. So yeah, I will use reference. But for things like this, these are like basic shapes. I don't necessarily need too much reference of like where the light's going to go and so on, because they're relatively basic shapes. But in saying that, if you don't know, if you're not sure, reference always will save the day. Don't make life hard for yourself by trying to like guess what a hamburger at midday on a snowy day will look like in the light. Just go and find some reference of that thing, and you should be like a little bit better on that. But yeah, it can also be tempting to do like, I know what that looks like, I don't need that reference, I'm good.
Yep.
Yeah. So you can see immediately now like how that difference of like what we had with the light and kind of adding those highlights and shading, what that's done to our kind of pixel art and kind of the legibility of our image. So now I'm going to kind of finish off working on that kind of salmon, teriyaki salmon there. And I want it to kind of look like it's a little bit kind of saucier. So let's get some kind of sauce at the bottom here, working on a layer underneath this just for ease of use. That's not bad. That's pretty good. Delicious. Then I can just smash those layers together. And we got that kind of teriyaki salmon sitting in there. But I also kind of want to try and get like a sense of kind of grilling. So here is potentially where I will maybe make a new layer, because I'm not sure how this is going to look. And I've got my reference image here, sorry, with this, and kind of like, all right, so there's darks and there's highlights because there's kind of like glaze on it. So I'm going to need to mess around with this a little bit and see kind of how I can do this. So let's pick this color here, this brown color, and we're going to put our layer on multiply. And I'm going to try. This is an absolute like trial and error kind of situation, and seeing how that looks. And that's not too bad, actually. Like I'm still seeing some of the detail of the salmon underneath it, but I've got that kind of the right color that I wanted. And I can start thinking about like how that's going to work in here, maybe make some kind of like random bits of sauce. Or I could go a little bit easier and say like, oh, the sauce has been kind of like drizzled on, that might make a little bit more sense for the eye
Oh
to
yeah,
work with.
okay. So you kind of have a little bit of an artistic license there, where you like actually it'll look a lot
Yeah,
more like what I want it to look like, rather than like maybe people might think it's a
exactly.
shadow or something else, a
It,
bit of a
yeah, like
glob.
it maybe breaks the volume a little bit too much. So like now that looks like it's been kind of like, like swirled with that kind of sauce, and that's that's not necessarily a bad look. Then I've got the green stuff on top, and I'm going to have to put a little bit of detail on there. But I can also start thinking about, and I might just merge those two layers together now if I'm happy with that. Um, and I might think about putting highlights on a different layer and going. Now I probably will go with full white
Mm.
and just get maybe drop the opacity down a little bit later if I want to, if I kind of feel like it's required. And I think it's probably going to be a little bit required here to do this. Yeah, that's pretty good. And I'm getting that shine again, going off of, excuse me, going off of the lighting structure that I decided upon earlier, where the light's coming from the top here. So trying to work to that and kind of make that salmon look nice and kind of glistening and shiny and appetizing.
It does look good.
That's pretty good. And now, whoops. And now I can do this, right? So these little like spring onions, they need to have a little bit of volume in them as well, right? So they need to come in and kind of work with a little bit of a darker shadow. So I'm going to bring in some blue in here, just a little bit of like, bring it over to the blue. And I'm going to lock this layer. I'm going to name it. Okay. And now I can start thinking about like, cool, yeah. So let's get some highlights in on this and some shadows.
Yeah, that's looking delicious. We got to stop doing these lunchtime live streams. There's food involved. I think I'm going to make that one of my rules. No more food. You're making us hungry.
Well, that's good. That's good.
That
means
good.
I'm doing the right thing, right?
All right.
But yeah.
Super domestic, selfish question. Where's the best Japanese, in your opinion, in Sydney?
Oh man, put me on the spot. Why don't you?
I know. Ask you anything about your craft, and you're like, "Yep, here's the answer to that. Here's your answer to this." This is very subjective.
It is very subjective. Yeah, I might have to come back to you on that one.
Wow. Okay, stumped him.
Yeah, because it's like but it's always one of those things, right? You're asking like, it's like, what's your favorite movie or something kind of like question. It's like you're asking me something that's like, oh, well, it depends. Am I in the mood for this or am I in the mood for that? Like,
because there's like more affordable Japanese, and then there's like and stuff where it's like you
and there's like full sit down kaiseki, like a bunch of courses, or there's just like, I just feel like a Japanese down and dirty and not particularly fast on what that's going to look like. Yeah, but we are very lucky, I think, in Australia with our like Japanese food options. I think we get a lot of very, very good ones. And it's always like, I always enjoy anytime I go to Japan and come back, and it's like, oh man, we this is like, ours isn't this good, but it's not too far off. And that's a nice feeling of like, okay, what we get at home is like, it's legit, it's good,
pretty good. Yeah. Whereas you go to Mexico or something and you eat their food and you're like, oh, our Mexican is nothing like this. It's nowhere near as good.
Yeah, or like in France, I'm half French. Anytime I go back to France, I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, you guys are really like stooged on the Japanese around you. Like,
right.
It's not
but
great.
These croissants are amazing.
Exactly. Yeah. Everything else great, but this not so much. Um, all right. Let's get a bit of color in on this background. I'm pretty happy with how this is looking actually in terms of detail of all these kind of different food items that I've got in here. Um, I'm starting to think that maybe my outline here isn't really working because everything else is quite painterly. So I'm not sure if I want to leave that in or not. We'll see. But I want to change the color of this gray. So this gray we added in at the start yesterday so that we could see the actual pixel grid that was there, because otherwise you can't see the pixel grid and it can be tricky to start your work. So if your artwork here is white, you can't see that grid. Whereas if you fill it with a color, you'll be able to see the grid there. So we did that with that in mind. So let me turn this off again. And I'm just going to bring up my old kind of Command U hue sat here. I'm going to go colorize. And I'm just going to pick a color that feels kind of good. That's not too bad. And I also want to put a shadow on this. So I'm going to go in with a kind of a dark blue and add in a little bit of a shadow in the background, just to give it a little bit more volume, make it stand out. Again, going with blue instead of black, just because it's just a little bit more lifelike, a little bit more kind of vivid to work with. I could probably boost my brush size to be a little bit bigger here. So 4 by 4 pixels. There we go. And now I can do the same thing over here. Get that shadow looking good.
And you really zoomed out doing that.
Yeah. Well, because again, I need to have a good overview of the whole artwork at this stage.
Yeah.
To see kind of what I'm doing. And I can drop the opacity down a little bit to something a bit softer. That's not bad. But yeah, if you like face into your, like, again, like from up close, this is a mess. Like you can't see what you're looking at here. So that's kind of the point of pixel art, is like you got to view it from a distance. That's when it all kind of comes together and works. And I do like kind of looking at this like this is the language that I have used to say salmon, and it's like, what? How? Like, oh, you zoom out and then your eye does the rest of the work for you.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a cool, nice little feeling. Let's animate this a little bit and make it even more appealing. So let's get some like little sparkles happening.
And this is where it gets a little computer gamey, that with the little sparkles, right?
Like exactly.
It's an item to be picked up or something.
Yeah. Oops. Here we go.
Nice. It's shiny.
Yeah, nice and shiny.
Definitely,
and I might
5 to 10 hit points from that bad boy.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the next step of this, right? Is to get this sense of like, let's get that shine of the box even more kind of pronounced. Because now we've made it shiny, we got to make sure that the box looks like it could do that. So, okay.
I think there's a pixel off that's killing me. Do you mind if I tell you where it is?
Up here?
In the shadow in the top right?
In the shadow in the top right. Oh, dude.
And I'm sorry, because it's just been sticking out to me.
Yep.
It's like 1 pixel.
There we go.
Thank you so much.
It does make a difference, right? Like that 1 pixel, if I like erase one of those from a distance, is like, why is there a dent there? Like everything becomes so much more pronounced from a distance and much more visible from a distance. And so, yeah, like you do need to like be considerate about where you're going to put your pixels and how that's going to work. And now I think I might start messing around with what we were just kind of talking about before, and make this into something that's got some stats on it, right? So now we can start thinking about like, all right, so this is going to be like strength, right? So we're going to do S. Oops. T. R.
Nice.
And then,
Yeah,
so this is also where.
So you do that. Oh, that's an R. How do you do that? That's a P full stop.
Yeah, that's a P full stop. So again, like maybe my thing is too small here. Maybe I haven't given myself enough room to work, or maybe I need to do something like this. That's an R.
That's an R.
Yeah,
That's totally an R.
that works.
I get it.
So strength, and then we're going to do a little bar, right? We're going to do a little video game stat bar. And again, we saw this yesterday when we were doing this. If you want to go from like a square to a rounded edge, you just get rid of the corner pixels. And now all of a sudden that's like a capsule. It's got like a rounded edge, like a little power bar.
Yeah.
You really don't need very much in order to do that. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I have no idea if these are going to be evenly spaced out or if that's going to work at all, because I haven't done any measurements, and that's silly of me. But that's all right.
It
that's
looks
okay.
good. All the three. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe
Right.
just the
Maybe
start might need to move over 1 pixel. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. Cool.
I think.
That's pretty good.
Sorry, I'm super.
No. That's
over the shoulder designing. Then I should just be quiet.
You need to be for that kind of stuff. There we go. We got 3 bars, and we got strength. The next one is going to be what we're going to say, power, maybe. W is going to be interesting. I might need to move over a little bit. Just one. Okay. And we can do rounding off or not. Up to us, how we kind of want to make this look. My S is off, and that's killing the typographer inside of me. But yeah. And then what's the next one? Next one is going to be HP. Oh, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go full gamer, and we're going to go crit.
Crit. It's all about the crits.
Yeah. This thing can give you a little bit of a stat boost when you're fighting. Do. Crit. Bang.
Nice.
Okay, now we can put something underneath that, and we can bring in some color bars, right? So let's go with strength. Strength is going to need to be red, I reckon. Oh, health is red, isn't it? Yeah, no, crit's red. Strength is going to be orange. And strength goes to bento box, gives you almost full strength. And then power is going to be, let's go with like a purple. Yeah, that'll work. Purple power. Not heaps. There's just one. And then crit's going to go red. And that's going to be max crit.
Wow.
Max crit.
This is what you want. Any game with crit, that's the build.
Yeah, that's the one. We can change the color of this a little bit. We can also give this a little bit more of a highlight. So now I'm going to actually do the thing that I didn't really want to do before. And I'm making all these new layers without naming them just because I'm moving through this pretty quickly. But that's going to be a problem later on. So if you're watching at home, don't do what I'm doing. But because we got 3 separate colors, it's just going to be easier for me to manage doing it like this. So we just want to give these bars a little bit of like a gel volume look.
Is that just a color over the top? Is that just a white?
It's just a white on top, and it just gives it a little bit of a look.
With like a transparent on the layer. Is that what it is? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And then I feel like I need some kind of a color behind, like, so that the emptiness of the bar isn't just emptiness. So that needs to have like a thing there as well to signify what's happening. All right. And that I don't need to do it on the red. There we go. It's not bad.
That looks awesome. Looks cool.
And then we
Johanna
can
says
swap
that the bento box is OP.
The bento box is OP, but as it should be. Let's see what we can do with some colors here and see if that works a little bit better. Maybe I need a stat sheet box for this. Bang, that's better. Now I can come in here and mess with the color of this a little bit more. Yeah, that's pretty good. And then these guys need to be a different color, I think.
You don't lose the outline too much, I don't think.
No.
It looks really nice, I think.
That's good. That's not bad. And then I need to obviously do something to this box, right? So that box is going to have to be, oops. So I'm going to need to rescale this first and foremost. So let's fit it to
just
roughly
about
to
a minute
the
or two
box.
left as well, by the way, just letting you know.
Yep. Oh, okay, cool. So let's move in actually to the last stage of this. So like I'd keep working on this a little bit, but what we've got at the moment is a tiny little piece of artwork, right? This is nowhere near being able to be printed. If I'm looking in millimeters, we've literally got, this is 1.2 centimeters by 1.2 centimeters wide if you print it. That's no good. If you wanted to make a sticker out of this, you can't at this stage. It'll just be like way too bad. So what I can do is just increase the size of this, but there's a trick to doing this. So let me show you how this works. So if you remember when we did our transform tool, we needed to change a particular setting. We need to do the same thing here. So here, if I go in and say, I want this to be like, I don't know, let's say 20 by 20. So 200 by 200 millimeters, hit return, and whoops, why not? That's interesting. Let me let me duplicate this real quick and duplicate image. Yep, good. I'm gonna flatten all this down and go in and say 200 by 200. Okay, there we go. All right. So see what that's done is it's done a lot of like smoothing for me. It's tried to do a lot of smoothing for me. I don't want that to happen. So let me undo that and then quickly do the same thing, bring up this menu and change this from automatic, which is what the transform tool is, to nearest neighbor, hard edges. So now that's going to allow me to do this. And if I go 200 by 200, it's going to preserve the pixel quality of that, except my file is now 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters. So that can then print.
Right.
But I can't work on this anymore because my 1 pixel brush, as you can see, is like minuscule compared to the size of one of the pixels in my thing. So this is one of those things that you do at the very end when you're finished.
This is like a print pre-press kind of thing. Like you're 100% happy. Yeah. Save a version, obviously, of the original. And then get stuck into it. Well, that's great. We're actually out of time. So Jeremy Lord, thank you very much for taking us through pixel art kind of basics yesterday and then our workflow today. It's been awesome.
Yeah, super fun. Thanks for the questions. It's been some really interesting questions. And yeah, I'll see you next time.
Well, go team. Where can people find you, Jeremy? Just a little plug. Where can people, best place for people to find you?
I am on my website, jeremylord.com or Instagram, jeremylord_. And that's it.
Awesome. All right. We'll check out Jeremy's stuff. We'll see you next week with some more Adobe Live. See you later.
Thanks.